All right, so we have our coding by hand, and we're going to use a class called Quadrilateral as to kind of talk about that hierarchy between the two. So before we even get into any of these questions, I just want to go through the code and take a look at this. The first thing I want to kind of mention is this abstract class, which, once again, I don't believe there was anything in adhesive this year about this, but it's always been in the past courses. So an abstract class is just a to-do list, and it tells all of the other classes, the child classes, what methods or what variables that they need to have. So this basically tells that if anything inherits quadrilateral, then it needs to have a method called perimeter, a method called area, and a method called getSides. And it needs to pertain to this information as well. So they need to return specifically what it's supposed to be. So you'll see that as we go through all of the child classes, that fact and those methods popping up. So if we look at our main class, this is just our to-do, right? So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to create a quadrilateral, it's going to create a rectangle, and it's going to create a square. And then we're just going to call some methods here. So rectangle.perimeter, square.area, and square.getSides. So nothing too crazy in that. But let's take a look at our first child class, right? So class rectangle extends quadrilateral. So we have double base and double height. Those are our two instance variables. We have our constructor, which is our default, and then we have our normal constructor here with two parameters. Once again, so we have our base and our height, and our default constructor is going to put ones in for both of those numbers if we don't know exactly. The constructor is then just going to assign our instance variables the information of the base and the height. We have perimeter here, which is just going to calculate perimeter. Remember, to calculate perimeter of a rectangle, you just add base plus height plus base plus height. Now it's going to return it. And then we have area, and area of a rectangle is just base times height. And our last class here is square, which is going to extend rectangle. Here we have one instance variable that we're going to use. We have both of our constructors, once again, there and there. We have our square, which will, our default constructor, which will put 1 in for our parameter. And then we say if b is equal to h, then side is going to be equal to b. Else, we're going to reply that it's not a square, and then side's just going to be 1. So that's going to make sure that our base and our height are the same, so that we do in fact have a square. And then once again we have our perimeter method, and we have our area method. Just a quick note, you'll see that both of these do not have a getSides method, and you'll notice though that the getSides method is not an abstract method. So therefore, it does not have to be in the other methods there, other child classes. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through it a little bit, let's go back and see if we can find the errors here. So we're going to have our first error, which is going to be in class main, line 3. And we cannot create an object for an abstract class. Which, once again, if you're unfamiliar with abstract classes, that was probably one of those that you didn't get. So an abstract class, once again, is a to-do list, but it's abstract for a reason. It's not usually something that you can have, such as like shape, right? How do I create a shape, right? The shape has to have more specifics than that. So lots of times shape will be an abstract class as well. All right, next mistake. It's going to be a rectangle class and line 15. All right, go ahead and pause the video if you didn't get that and see if you can find the reasoning. When you come back, it will be there. All right, so our reasoning here is that B and H are garbage collected. So if I go to that, line 15, those variables should say base plus height. Let me erase that. Plus height. All right, mistake number 3. This one is also going to be in the rectangle class. And this is going to be line numbers 19 through 20. See if you can figure this one out. This does deal with the abstract class. Go ahead and pause that video. All right, so the abstract class demands a double. So if I go to rectangle line 19 and 20, we will see that it says public int area, and we're returning in int. But if I look in my abstract class, it tells me that it needs to be a double. All right, mistake number 4 is going to be in the square class, line number 5. Once again, go ahead and pause the video, see if you can find the mistake. All right, so that default constructor, it needs to have 2 arguments in it. So if we look here, remember that our arguments have to match our parameter. So since we have 2 parameters there, that's not going to match up. And then the last mistake is also in class square. And this is going to be line number 23. So once again, go ahead and pause that video. All right, so we can see that side and 2 are backwards there in math.pow. So this is a mistake back from semester 1, but remember if we do math.pow, we'd want to do side squared. So it should be side comma 2, not 2 comma side. All right, so now our program should be working as we want it to be working. So first question I have for you is why does class, so question number 2, why does class square have parameters b and h instead of just side? So if we look at this, especially if we look at the mistake that we did here, it makes sense that a square would just have 1 parameter instead of 2 parameters, right? Because all the sides on a square are identical. So why do we need to have 2? Why do we need to have that b and that h? And that goes back to our whole discussion about inheritance, right? So if square is going to extend rectangle and it's going to be a child class of rectangle, then it has to have the same parameters as rectangle or more. It can always add more. If you think about adhesive where it adds like the illustrator, right? It still has, the book has a title and an author, but when we have a child's book, it adds the illustrator into it. So therefore, we cannot have less parameters, we have to have more. So that's why we're going to have a b and an h here, so that we can still have the 2 sides and everything will work. And in fact, it will also allow all of these methods to work and whatnot too, because now we have a side and a base and a height that's just going to be equal to the side. All right, I'm not going to write that answer down, but go ahead and rewind the video if you need that again. And number 3, assuming that those 5 errors get fixed or deleted, what would be output by this program? So we are just going to delete that first error in the main class. So what would be printed here is going to be 14.0 2.25, and 4. And so when I go back to see what my main class is actually doing, I see these 3 lines of code. So line 6 is going to print 14.0, right? Because I go to rect.perimeter. My rectangle has a 3 and a 4. So that when it calculates that, it will do 3 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4, which will give us 14. But remember, that number is a double, so then it will return 14.0. My next one was square.area. So it's going to check for our square. Once again, it's going to make sure that those two numbers are the same. Okay, which they are. So therefore, it's not going to print not a square message. And then it's going to calculate the area. So it's going to do 1.5 times 1.5, which gives us our 2.25. I'm sorry, it's actually going to do math.pow, so it's going to do 1.5 squared, which is the same thing, and gets you 2.25. And then lastly, for 4, we're doing the square.getSides method. And you might just be a little bit confused about, well, there is no getSides. But that's what is so great about inheritance, is that it inherits that method from its parent. Okay? So even though there's no getSides method here, we can look at rectangle, which it inherits from. Oh, there's no getSides method here. We can go to quadrilateral, which it inherits from, and oh, there is a getSides method, and look, it's going to return 4, which is why that answer would be 4. So this is why inheritance is so big in Java, and why it's an object-oriented program, is because every class, even quadrilateral, even though it doesn't say, every class is inherited from the object class. So stuff that, kind of keeps repeating, like the toString method, in the object class is a toString method, and it says what to do with it when you get it. The .length method, that is a method that is in the object class, so it's typically a method that every class can use. Now, if you do have certain ways that you want to do the toString method, right, that might not be the same for everything, that's when we have to override it, which is what we do every single time we create a toString method. Same thing for length. If length is just a little bit different, sometimes length is going to be a number of characters, sometimes it might be number of words, it could be whatever we want. So if we ever want to, we can always override it to make it fit exactly what we want it to do for our class. So that is inheritance. If you've got any questions, we can chat about those